Hello YouTube, W&J's Handy Dad here, and today I'm going to show you how to create a custom leather, or in this case pleather, steering wheel cover. Now, before y'all post a bunch of hateful comments about how you can buy a steering wheel cover and just slip it on and all that, yes, I know that. That's not what this video is about. This is not about what's the easiest, quickest way to do this. This is how to create something that's going to be a little bit more factory. Really, it's going to depend on how your sewing skills are. But you know what I don't like about steering wheel covers generally is they're either too thick or there's gaps in them or whatever. It's hard to really find one that I like. But what I do like are leather wrapped steering wheels that come from the factory. So we're going to give this a go. I've got some black pleather here, pleather, however you want to pronounce it. It's basically a fake leather, and get this on Amazon or maybe even at the sewing shop. Different colors to suit your taste. So we're going to need to take two measurements, one all the way around the edge of the steering wheel, and then we're going to measure the thickness of the steering wheel. So to get this accurate, I'm using a sewing tape measure, and I'm going to tape it to the steering wheel so that we have some consistent points here. Because we need it to follow this curve as accurately as possible, and that'll be hard to do with just two hands holding it. So I'm getting 47 inches. Next measurement's just the circumference. You see we're getting about 4 inches there. Let's make sure that's consistent throughout the steering wheel. And it is, so 4 inches thick, 47 inches around. You'll have to decide what you want to do in this section and in this section, because my plan is to wrap the 4 inches around and sew it on the inside all the way around. But here and here, obviously I'm not going to be able to do that. And I'm thinking the bottom would probably be the point that I want to sew it together. So in other words, start the wrap, go all the way around, sew it together here, and then slip it over. So you see what I did is I measured 4-inch lines on here, and then I'm going to use this straight edge to draw this in. So this is the section I'm going to cut out. Basically, I'll just take a razor and the straight edge and just run along there, try to get that as perfectly cut as I can. And obviously I'm not going to do that on my trunk because I really don't want a razor cut through my paint. And I'm doing this on the floor because I don't really have a good workstation that's long enough to do this. If you don't have something like this, I highly recommend it. It's just a little sewing kit that I got off of Amazon, but it has the different hooked needles, and then it has two different colors of thread that are pretty heavy duty. So for this project, obviously I'm going to use the black thread, but I'm not an expert seamstress or anything, so as far as sewing skills, I just have very, very basic skills. But what I found is these curved needles make it a whole lot easier when you're doing projects like this than if you're trying to use a straight needle. Once you've got it threaded, there's a couple ways you can deal with this. One is just leave it loose like that, and probably what's going to happen is your needle and thread are going to separate at some point when you're sewing. What I normally do when I'm sewing stuff like this is I'll double it, and that way as I'm pulling it through, you're doing double threads. Obviously the advantage there is you got strength. The disadvantage is you're using a lot of thread, and it can be a little bit more messy. The other option is, of course, to tie this in a knot here so that it won't come undone and then sew. The disadvantage with that is you've got to be able to undo that knot when you're done or cut it off, and depending on how good your eyesight is, that may be easier said than done. I've decided this is worth the extra work, basically marking lines down each side 1/4 inch in, and then marking 1/4 inch tabs along the way. Now this is going to stretch when it goes on the steering wheel, so those are actually going to be a little bit farther apart than 1/4 inch by about 10% roughly. So short of doing some complicated calculations and trying to get those to where when they stretch they'll be at 1/4 inch, I'm just leaving it like that, and that should be close enough. And this particular fabric doesn't stretch as much as the one in the 2010, so this one's actually cut to 42 inches long and 4 inches wide. And then I also did a line every 5th line, and the reason I did that is because when you're sewing on the car you can't really see where you're at, and so the goal is to try to have the stitch go through the same ones rather than like if you're going here to here and then back it's crooked or whatever. So hopefully this way it will pull together. So that's the plan. We'll see if this one comes out the best of all the ones I've done. So I'll just start in the corner here, and you want to get as close to that edge as you can because you don't want too big of a bump when you flip this back around. And you also want to make sure you have everything lined up. Okay, I've gone all the way down and all the way back, and the reason I do that is so that I can tie it off at the end. You see I also put a piece of painter's tape to hold this thread down because it kept getting in the way. So this last one I've gone through to this side. Now I'm going to come back through. This is the only one where I've come from the bottom up, and that's because I want to tie this off here. I'm in the 2008 today, and I wanted to do the same thing that I did with the 2010. Now you know me, I'm a bit of a OCD perfectionist, and the 2010 came out great. I mean, honestly I could live with it. It feels great, it's comfortable, it doesn't move around, but it's not perfect. And I wanted to get, you know, this would be my second attempt. I want to get this one, quote, perfect. So what I'm going to do is clean this one with alcohol. I'm probably going to use some glue. Now, like I said, the 10 does not move around. It has no glue on it whatsoever. But I think to make it an even longer lasting, more professional job, I'm going to want to put some glue here and possibly just a couple dabs on the sides, just to keep it, you know, if it stretches out over time or anything, and that it won't move. And you see I keep a pretty clean steering wheel because not a lot of dirt coming off of it. You really need to test out whatever fabric you buy. It was about 40 inches for the one that I used in the 2010, which is a very smooth one. This is a textured pleather, kind of matches the grain here a little bit, as well as the grain on some of the other parts. So I just thought I would try a different fabric just to see if I liked it. But this one took 42 inches. And you see it's a stretch to fit, and then once it's on, it's got a nice tautness to it, so it's not gonna move around when it's sewn. But like I said, I'm gonna go ahead and glue it. The other thing I did, I think I said 3 7/8 when I did the 2010. That was not quite enough. I think you are better off doing between 4 and 4 1/4, so that you have a complete wrap of the steering wheel. The 3 7/8, since it doesn't stretch this direction hardly at all, you need it to fully cover. If you are planning on it stretching, it just doesn't stretch, whereas going around lengthwise it stretches. So that's why I think that we said this was 47 inches steering wheel, and 42 inches of fabric is wrapping it because it stretches. You could probably get away even with this one going 41 or 40. It may still stretch. You see this has got, it's still pretty tight. I mean, you know, but I can move it. So, but it won't move once it's sewn because we're gonna start sewing in there and there. But I'll go ahead and put a couple dabs of glue in a couple places, and obviously when this is sewn tight, that tends to sit there and not move. I've noticed on the 2010 it stays flush, it doesn't move at all, but the glue will just give it one extra layer of protection there. Main thing I'm trying to do here is line the seam up between the R and the B on the airbag to get it so that it's wrapped around in the correct way. Like I said, I feel like having the seam at the bottom is better than having it at the top or somewhere on the sides or anything. Alternatively, I guess you could make multiple seams. I've seen steering wheels where they've wrapped like a section here and here, and then a separate section there and there. It's really however much sewing you want to do, but like I said, for my purposes, I'm not a sewing person per se, so you know, I'll break out the needle and thread if I need to, but I really prefer not to have to do it. And I don't know if they're showing up on camera, but you know, I've got the lines drawn as well as the 1/4 inch marks all the way around, and I'm gonna try to follow those with the needle so that we have even spacing all the way around. So that's the plan. I'll take one very long thread, 2 needles, starting from the inside with both needles. That'll create a point here, and I can either tie it in a knot or just start sewing. But the baseball stitch, again, will be inside, come over, and then inside of there, come back around, and so forth. You want to make sure that you stay consistent with your needles. If you let one drop, say, behind the steering wheel, and then you come back, you're going to have a thread wrapped around your steering wheel. It's not the end of the world if you do make that mistake. Just unthread the needle and pull the thread back out, and then rethread the needle. But obviously, if you can avoid that by keeping your needles always in the same spot. So that's the process. It's boring and not fun to watch, but I'll film some of the sewing. Before you glue, you want to make sure that it's approximately centered with the seam on the inside middle of the steering wheel. In other words, you want to not feel the seam typically when you're driving. And then I'm just using some Aleene's leather glue. So I'll let that dry, and then I'll come back and do the sewing. Here is the final result. You're gonna see some wet glue still. That will dry clear, you won't see it. But I think that came out really nice this time. I think if I keep doing these, I'll just get better and better at doing it, obviously. So one thing I learned, you need about 12 feet of thread to do from here all the way around in one pass. So basically, take your 12 feet of thread, pull it through here so that you got 6 feet coming out on each side, and then you'll be able to do it one pass and end over here without ever having to rethread. I did about 7 feet the first go round, and it finished right about there. And then I did another 5 feet, went there and had extra. So, you know, it's better to have too much than not enough. I did about 5 feet of thread from here to here, and it was one pass through, no problems, and I had extra when I finished. Then tying them off, you just tie several knots. I mean, there's not really a right or wrong way to do it. You just want to tie enough knots that it won't come undone. And then it's overkill to put the leather glue on there, but that'll also help keep it sturdier. And I also did the leather glue, as you saw, under here on both the top side and the back side. A couple of things I've learned from trial and error on this is I went too thick with the leather wrap on this one. So I would say stick between 4 inches and 4 1/8 inches. I went 4 1/4, and it's not horrible, but it would have been better at 4 1/8. Number two, I went ahead and got a much thicker thread. It's still a UV resistant nylon, heavy duty. It's rated at a 420D. It's a lot thicker than the thread I was using originally, and so it gives a lot more pull and doesn't break. The other one, if you pulled really hard, sometimes it would snap. This one doesn't do that. Next, I got the biggest needle that I had in my very limited collection of needles, since I'm not really a sewer. But the thicker needle with the thicker thread seems to help pull it through. The other thing I learned is you can go somewhere between 5 and 10 stitches at a time, kind of loosely, and then pull them tight. So either with a pick, pulling them, screwdriver, or even using the needle itself to kind of pull up. And what I mean by that is get up under, you know, the farthest away stitch, pull it tight, and it'll start pulling the back ones tighter. And then you just go to the next one and do the same thing. And even though maybe that sounds like that's gonna take more time, it seems easier to find these marks when they're kind of loose than when you pull each one tight as you go. Then you're trying to find the needle in there like that. It's a little bit harder than just doing that. The other thing is I went all the way to the edge on every fifth one. You might even go every other one, again, because when you're sewing like in here, sometimes it's hard to find your marks. And so, like I said, when I originally did this, I was trying to make sure that I went even rather than maybe starting in the middle of one on the end of another one and creating that kind of diagonal pull. I'm not finding any difference between using one needle and sewing through and using two needles and sewing through, other than one is a lot less confusing and seems to go quicker. So I would say the one needle method is perfectly fine. As far as trying to do this section, if you wanted to wrap it to where it tucked in there, that would probably give you the best looking results, but obviously that's going to require a lot more thought to try to figure out where to cut this section and how much thicker it needs to be in there. I'm not really worried about it. I think it's okay here. I don't like the way this kind of bubbled. I want to see if I can, when this is all said and done, kind of heat it and stretch it maybe. So, you know, I think it's one of those things, if you do this over and over and you're willing to keep redoing it, you'll eventually get it looking like a factory one. I'm not quite there yet, but it certainly seems like each time I do this I learn something new and it gets better. I'll show you what I was talking about as far as sewing it when it's loose. Another thing is you got to remember to always come back through one way. So either I've been doing it towards me, it's easier to not screw it up, but if you go through and then come back this way, then you're going to have a thread around your steering wheel. So you see those went a lot faster than when I was trying to do it with them already tightened up. And then, so you can just go back through and pull all the old ones tight. You don't want to get too far ahead of where you've got them pulled tight though, because it does tend to get a little more difficult to get it the way you'd want it to be. So I definitely don't recommend sewing the whole thing and then trying to pull it tight. The other thing I haven't tried to do that might not be a bad idea is to run this whole thing through the sewing machine and basically make a fold over on the edge, and even possibly use a colored thread on that. These are all things you can do depending on how fancy you want to get with this. I was mainly wanting this, one, for that kind of leathery feel, and two, since there was a lot of damage up at the top of my steering wheel, it was kind of rough. So that's how I've been tightening it up, and like I said, it seems to sew a lot quicker that way. I am done with the stitching part. You see, I didn't get these quite tightened up enough, and that's because I had a couple spots like there that weren't wanting to pull, and the harder I pulled on them, I was afraid I was going to just rip through the leather, so I opted to leave those alone. But you see, this is more what it looks like when you get the stitch just perfect and pulled tight. So I'm going to put a dab of glue in here and then work on trying to get this one smoothed out, and work on trying to get this one smoothed out. A little bit disappointed this did not come out here and here as well as it has in the past. So I'm assuming it's because I cut too much leather here rather than, probably should have cut it shorter or went all out and tried to do a tuck in there. But like I said, these are sort of things you just learn from practicing, and you know, hopefully my video will be helpful to you if you attempt this. One thing I found that was helpful was turning the steering wheel so that I was pretty much always working on the side over here rather than coming up across the top. It was a little bit easier to stitch. And that's also when I got this. This was all done by turning the steering wheel, whereas this was done without turning the steering wheel. So again, learning stuff. Don't know if I need a heat gun or if the Texas sun is enough to heat this up, but like I said, this looks the worst of any of the ones I've done. And the only thing I can think is there's just too much material here. The feel of this is amazing when you're driving. Definitely feels like a high dollar steering wheel with that on there. So if I do this again, I may try to take the time to really calculate how far from here to here at the top, and then how much would be there, and then how much would be there. And before you go, oh, well, that's easy, just measure. Remember, because the fabric stretches, even though it was like 47 inches around, I think it was like 40 to 42 inches of fabric. So I'd have to do some calculations to figure out where, once it's stretched, it would come to here and here, and that probably be a lot harder than it sounds. The other option obviously would be to do it in 3 or 4 pieces, like one piece up there, one piece here, one piece there, one piece there. I don't know. Anyway, I mean, the sewing part of it takes a lot of time, so it's one of those things I really don't like to do. But I'm disappointed in how this part came out, because this was a lot better before. So I don't know, but I got the sewing a lot better. Anyway, hope the video was helpful. Appreciate a thumbs up. Subscribe if you're not already subscribed, and please tell your friends about my channel. Thank you very much.